Hello everybody and welcome back to the Galactic Armory. My name is Aaron and it's just me today. Today I'm going to be walking you through the build process of this Galactic Armory custom Mandalorian helmet. Now the concept for this helmet was designed by Will Nunez. Be sure and leave a link to his profile in the description, as well as links to the 3D files and the 3D prints that we offer in our shop. Starting off with the raw 3D print off our CR10V2 printer. I printed this at 0.3mm layer height and about 8% infill. Once we've got all the supports off, we need to start smoothing out the helmet before we can start painting. Now this is kind of something you'll have to do for every 3D print if you want to paint it, mostly because the layer lines of the 3D printing process will show through the paint quite evidently. So to prevent that, we'll need to smooth out the entire surface before we can paint anything. To do that, Jamie's going to be using something from a different 3D printing process, this SLA 3D printing resin. Now this resin is usually used by resin printers, often called SLA printers, but we're going to be using it on this FDM print. This resin is photoreactive, meaning that it will react and harden when exposed to UV light. So Jamie's going to dip a brush in the resin, apply a very thin layer all around the helmet, and then use a UV lamp to actually harden and cure that resin. The benefit of doing this method is that you can apply very thin coats and you can make sure that it's all level and all in the correct spots before you harden it. You have to wear gloves and a respirator when doing this though, because we are kind of hacking the resin to make it do something that it's not fully intended to do, and you want to be safe when handling this material. With the resin cured, we usually take some IPA alcohol and clean off any of the excess. There'll be like a thin layer of ooze or goo, and that's just uncured resin that is not going to be able to really cure no matter how hard you hit it with the UV light. So we're just going to use some alcohol and a paper towel to wipe that off. Once the resin is fully hardened and cleaned and you can touch it and it's dry to the touch, we can begin sanding down this resin to create our smooth surface. Unfortunately, I seem to have lost the sanding footage, so I'll just substitute it with this footage of a different helmet. But the technique is the same. We're going to be using a mouse detail sander with a 60 grit pad of sandpaper on there. Now 60 grit is very coarse and rough, but that's what's needed to sand this resin because the resin itself is quite hard and you wouldn't want to hand sand this entire helmet just because it would take you quite a while and leave you quite frustrated. So we're going to be using the mouse sander to hit a lot of the high spots and try and get into all the detail spots that we can. We'll probably have to hand sand a little bit, but this mouse sander definitely speeds up the process. Now after we've used the mouse sander, it is quite rough, so we're going to be using some 2-in-1 filler and sandable from Rust-Oleum to fill in a lot of those scratches and remaining layer lines. This is like a thick spray paint they use on automobiles, and it's part of the bread and butter of finishing just about any 3D print. To touch up any last remaining spots, we're going to be using some Bondo glazing and spot putty, but it's been thinned out with some acetone. This is a technique we've done in more recent videos, and we like it quite well. Bondo glazing and spot putty is essentially a paste that will begin to harden after about an hour. It's then very easy to sand, and so what we'll be able to do is apply this Bondo, let it dry and harden, and then sand it smooth to complete the surface. After a few different rounds of the filler primer, bondoing, and sanding, we're ready to give this helmet the final sanding pass, which will be a wet sand with 400 grit sandpaper. Now, wet sanding really elevates the finish and smoothness of the helmet. You basically just let running water run over the helmet and sand it away like you would normally, but the water helps create a much smoother surface than it would dry sanding. With the helmet finally smooth, we can start laying down some paint. Now I know most of this helmet is going to be white, so we're going to be applying a Rust-Oleum flat white primer. This is probably one of my favorite primers that we've used. It's a little bit cloudy when it's applied, but it dries to a very nice matte finish and works as a great base for follow-up colors. Now that our white has fully dried, we're going to be applying some metallic silver actually. The silver is going to be part of the weathering for this helmet. I knew I wanted it to be a little bit roughed up in some spots, and this silver is kind of going to be the base of that. Once the silver paint has dried, we're going to be using some liquid latex, and I like to apply it with a toothpick for precision. Now this liquid latex is used in like special effects makeup to create zombies and different scarring, but it also works great as a cover for painting. The latex is going to dry on the surface of our helmet. We'll paint over it, but anything underneath that liquid latex is going to remain the color it was because the paint is just going to lay on top of the latex and then we'll peel the latex off. So any places that we want to stay silver, we're applying a little bit of this liquid latex. I'm making sure to hit a lot of the hard crease lines and the edges since that's where this rubbed metal would most likely poke through. You can add a couple scratch marks on the forehead or the face area that can be attributed to like battle damage. But a lot of this silver that is going to be poking through, I'm going to attribute to just rubbing on other hard surfaces. And those corners and hard edges are going to be the first places where that is going to happen. So you'll see I painted the entire helmet white again, as well as taped off the area that's going to be painted blue. I'm applying liquid latex again, this time just over parts of the silver and parts of the liquid latex that I applied beforehand, but this time we're going to be covering a little bit of white on top of the silver as well. This is going to give the helmet a nice layered weathered effect. And when you have multiple colors poking through the weathering and damage, I think it really adds a lot to the character of the helmet. You want to make sure to apply the liquid latex just a little bit past your first round of latex. If you apply it just directly on top of, or like less latex than you applied the first time, it's not going to do anything because the latex will just peel up as one solid piece. Okay, now we're ready to start painting the helmet finally. I'm going to be using a Montana Gold Signal Blue. This is a blue that I'm also going to be using for parts of my ODST build, so I wanted to see how it would look on this helmet. I love making blue helmets just because blue is such a good color for weathering. I feel like once we do the black wash on it and follow it up with oil paints, I just like how blues look when they're weathered. Once we've waited a sufficient amount of time for our paint to dry, we can peel off our tape, as well as peel off all the liquid latex, revealing our colors underneath. And if you look closely, you can see the white spread out and the silver behind it. I'm also going to be using a sanding sponge to kind of sand away the edges a little bit more. This is great for just rubbing down corners and applying a lighter effect than the liquid latex. You can also do this with just a regular pad of sandpaper as well to apply some small scratches across the helmet. I'm going to be using some CA glue and some activator to glue on all the extras and the accessories. We want those glued on now before we start weathering so that we can weather everything as one uniform piece. Now Jamie here is going to be doing an oil wash on this helmet, something we have grown quite fond of lately. He's going to be putting in some oil paint and thinning it with some mineral spirits. Now typically we would do an acrylic wash and thin that out with either water or alcohol, but since this is an oil paint, we have to thin it out with mineral spirits. We like doing the oil wash a little bit better than the acrylic wash just because we feel like the surface of an oil wash is a little bit more genuine, and when we apply the oil paints to touch up certain areas, it matches quite well. You can see Jamie brushes this thinned out oil paint onto the helmet and then wipes it off in random directions with a paper towel. Depending on how dark you want this helmet to be, you can add a little bit more mineral spirits to a paper towel and wipe it off. That will remove more of the oil paint. You can definitely see the difference on the other side of the helmet that hasn't been oil washed yet. This provides a very nice and quick weathered effect. Now I am going to take that same oil paint and do a little bit of dry brushing into the recesses of the helmet. You really don't need a lot of paint for this step. That tube that I used could probably last me a lifetime of just using this technique for weathering. You dab a little bit of paint into your brush, wipe most of it away, and then paint it into some of the creases and recessed areas of the helmet, touch up any oil wash parts that maybe it missed, and you really have a lot more control here applying it with a paintbrush than you did with just lathering it on. Now I'm just going to use black here. You could add like some burnt umber or different shades of brown to the weathering if you wanted to. I believe I ended up using some yellow, but I'm mostly doing black here. I like a good oily looking helmet, but you can definitely use other colors to get different effects. Using browns to imply more dirt, or like browns and yellows to imply rust. The possibilities here are pretty much endless, but you can see adding this paint into the creases and kind of unifying and connecting everything definitely brings the whole weathered helmet together. You can see on the unweathered side, it looks good, but it's, patchy. Now that we have all our painting done, we want to unify and combine and protect everything. We're going to do that with a matte clear coat. That's really going to help seal in all the oil paints that would otherwise wipe off with your fingerprints or any kind of other oily substance. And this matte clear coat is not going to change the colors in any way, but just kind of lock them all in. I'm just going to apply one pretty good coat on there and call it good. So this helmet wouldn't be complete without a visor. For that, I've printed out the visor template that I included in the files. This provides just a rough shape of the visor that you're going to need. So I lay this on top of a Hobart face shield. It's a little bit small. I have to fiddle around with this fitting a little bit. But then I'll trace it out with a silver Sharpie, trim it out with some tin snips, and then kind of refine and fine tune the shape from there. I had to trim off the corners of the top of the T-visor a little bit more, but once that was done, it slotted right into the ridge line on the inside of the helmet that I include with my recent helmet models. That way we can insert the visor without having to use steel stick epoxy putty or anything like that. With that slotted in place, there's one next detail we need to do. And you see these 3 vent lines on each cheek. We're going to be filling those in and backing them with some black stockings and a wire mesh. Now this is very easy to apply. I just cut out a section of the black stockings that will fit behind all 3 cutouts. Do the same for the wire mesh using the tin snips from before. Now this is the same stockings that we used for the Dirge helmet. They're nice and matte. They don't reflect light very much, which is good in this case. And the wire mesh laid on top of them is really going to pop, I think. Give the impressions that these 6 cutouts are actually vents, and the black stockings behind them just prevent people from still being able to see in. You know, the mesh is tightly wound, but it's not so tight that you can't see through it. And so the stockings are just going to close that off so that you don't see any kind of beard or face poking through those holes. I apply it just with hot glue, laying on the mesh, gluing it in, laying on the stockings, and then gluing that in as well. And you can see how much this quick effect elevates those 3 cutouts instead of just making them dark voids. Well, that's it, everybody. If you've been following along so far, you have yourself a completed Galactic Armory Mandalorian helmet. I'm really pleased with how the helmet came out. I love the design of it. It really draws inspiration from the Galactic Armory logo helmet, which is based off a medieval barbute helmet. So I guess you could call this a medieval Mandalorian helmet as well. Again, big thank you to Will Nunez for coming up with the concept for this helmet. And remember, you can find the 3D prints and the 3D files linked down below. I am quickly running out of helmet space in the shop, so I'm having to find new and creative ways to put them all around, but for now I'm going to hang this guy up on the wall and call it finished. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, I hope you learned something, and I hope that you're feeling confident enough to take on a project like this yourself. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.